At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 563 of Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services, and a big shout-out, as always, to subscribers of the podcast, whether you are on Circle, Patreon, or Facebook, but especially all of you who are watching, listening, supporting, and sharing. Thank you so very much. There's a lot of stuff that has been going on, and I am back from a week-long vacation, first vacation that I've actually unplugged. Well, there were a couple things that I absolutely had to respond to, but otherwise I was unplugged in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, hiking and doing a bunch of other things. It was the first vacation that I've had probably in years that I've because as you know me, I'm always working and evolving and doing something, but it was nice to be able to do that. It was excellent. So I'm back, and I am now starting, or going to be starting, back trips, teaching, training, speaking, all of it from now. Pretty much, it's August 30th, but it's going to start like the second week of September here. So just in a couple of weeks, I will be basically going back and forth and training until the middle of November, dude. Yeah. Exactly. It is going to be crazy. However, one of the coolest things is that finally, I got these back. They are exclusive only to the Imagine Listening sessions, and it is the official I Am 911 Challenge coins. They are back. I've got about 200 of them. So if you are going to be at any of the 8-hour courses that I'm teaching at, or the conferences where I'm doing Imagine Listening, and you share a story during the Imagine Listening piece, you will earn yourself a challenge coin. So I hope to see you there, and we are going to jump right in, and I am super excited for my guest. We literally made this happen yesterday and we're here early this morning to record this episode. We've got a lot to talk about, and my guest today is my good friend Christa out of Michigan, and we're going to throw her up here really quick. You know, I forgot to ask you what you wanted for your title.
Krista's fine. We'll roll with Christa. I'm sure people have other titles for me, but we'll just roll with Christa today.
Well, Christa is a 911 professional, and just really quick before we get into more of your story, we've got some stories. We've got a podcast that you've got coming out that we want to talk about as well. But just a short summary of your public safety experience, please.
So I started in 2015 in Genesee County, working as a dispatcher. I was very involved with our dispatch program. I was a CTO there, worked the PR committee, CAD committee whenever I left, and tactical dispatching. But I was there for almost 7 years. And now I work in the private sector with Intrado. I get to talk to a bunch of different dispatch centers across the country. I love it. Cause I knew when I got out of dispatch, which I'm sure we will talk about later on, whenever I got out of dispatch, I knew that I didn't want to completely leave dispatch. I was way too passionate about everything 911 related. So I knew whatever I did, I wanted to do something that helps dispatchers. I felt like my experience in the dispatch center I didn't want it to go to waste. I was like, I just want to be able to use it for good, and just feel like I'm still helping people. So that's kind of my little life in a nutshell.
I think that's one of the things that we really get into, right, when we're working in public safety, especially in 911. It's that service that you're putting forth, whatever it may be, and phone calls, or even to the point of putting in warrants, or adding in different information for children that are missing, and that satisfaction, especially when they find that child or adult, whichever, and you get to take it out. You're like, there's that sense of purpose that you feel like you're doing something that's bigger than yourself, and that gets into your blood right away. But when you end up going out, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, you end up feeling like, who am I now?
Yeah.
What is my purpose now?
It's an identity crisis, because like your friends and family know you as like the 911 dispatcher. Like my friend, like my family, I'll even say like my family, or like when I'd be at church and stuff like that, people would be like, oh, this is Christa. She works in 911. Like, it's like that, like, this is a really cool job. Like, we want to tell everyone she's a dispatcher. Or like, even they might text you and be like, hey, I know you work in dispatch. Like, what do you recommend for this? Or what do you recommend for that? And so then whenever you no longer are in dispatch, it's like, wait, now I just get like, now I'm just a family member. I'm not like, my job's not that cool. Like, there's a lot of things that go into it. And, I get to tell people, how like my job now gets to kind of help 911, but then it's like a whole long thing. I feel like Chandler being from Friends sometimes, whenever I'm telling people what I do, nobody actually knows what Chandler does. Nobody knows what I do now.
Yes. Yeah. And, and in some sense too, at the same time, you feel kind of left out. Like all the folks that, like, you still have friends, right, in 911 or the center that you were at or whichever, but it's never quite the same as being
No, and I feel like so out of the loop. Like, I just talked to one of my buddies 2 days ago. I was like, you didn't call me and tell me this happened? He's like, oh, sorry, I forgot. And I'm like, I'm having to find out through the grapevine. Like, it's like, come on, like
regular
I've been gone for
folk.
a while, but I still talk to you.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think what kind of softens the blow of that a little bit is the fact that and you or I and I are in the same space, where we ended up going into that private side. And like you were saying in the beginning with your summary, you get to visit and or talk with a lot of different centers. So you're still kind of in it. Where like myself as well, when I left in 2013, I ended up visiting a lot of centers to train them on different, phone services, text for 911. Like, I was in those centers and I could sit there and listen. I definitely wanted to jump in and take calls if I heard like more than 2 rings or whatever. Like, I want to jump in, but it's never quite the same. It's hard to get used to it, especially in the beginning. When I first left dispatch, I remember sitting at my desk. I had a piece of paper and a pencil ready for notes, and I was sitting there, and I remember having a moment where I thought, what the hell are you doing? Like, no one's going to be calling you right now. No one is calling. And I'm sitting there, I was holding onto my pen, and I had my hand on that notepad waiting, and my hand on the keyboard waiting. And I was like, you're stupid.
Yeah. Well, my first day in Toronto, like, I literally, so we work from home, and I had like my whole office set up, and I just sat at my desk. Like, I had no meetings, no nothing. And I just sat at my desk, and I remember being like, I can't leave. Like, what if somebody sends me an email? And I'm like, if they send you an email, you have it going to your phone, like, go make some food. Like, I just felt so tethered to my desk, because at 911, you can't leave. And I remember the very first day I sat at my desk for the full 8 hours, like, unless, like, I remember like running to the bathroom and coming back because like it was like that quick, like just it was a really hard transition realizing,
Yes,
hey,
it's still
you
in
can
your
go,
head.
yeah, you can go change a load of laundry if you want to. Like you can get up and walk away from your desk. And actually, if you saw my office setup, I now have 3 monitors in here. And I just recently added a 3rd monitor because it's a separate computer I use for the podcast that you and I were talking, like the one that I'm starting. And so I was like, I've got it. And I took a picture and sent it to one of my friends. And I was like, I think I'm back in dispatch. I've got 2 keyboards, 2 mice, 3 monitors. Like, I was like, I think I've made it back to dispatch somehow.
Probably a bunch of drinks on your,
yeah.
on your desk
Well,
as
I
well.
only have coffee right now. Actually, I do have coffee and I have a Coke from yesterday that I didn't move. But I usually have coffee and water down here. And then I'll grab like a random pop or Coke or soda or whatever it is, wherever you're from.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, I know the feeling. And so we're going to get to more of that here as we're going along the way. But let's go back in time a little bit and let's actually talk about the buildup towards the end of your dispatching career and transitioning over into Entrado. We were talking just in the beginning before we started recording here, and you mentioned 3 different incidents that happened. Like, so this is what I've been saying in my 8-hour class. It was the same way in the beginning as it was in the end for me when I started dispatch. And but the end, I'll say that if 911 were a gang, I was getting beat out. Those last 2 weeks, man, those last 2 weeks that I had, it was like I was getting beat out. Like the dispatch gods or universe, whatever you want to call it, was like, hey, bro, you think you're gonna leave? Like, you can check out, but you can never leave. And you just started getting a beat down with the worst calls. Luckily, also the dispatch universe, I don't know if you feel this way as well, but I always felt like I would get maybe 4 bad calls in a row, and then the universe was like, here, I'm going to throw you a bone. And there was like a funny, outrageous one to kind of cleanse the palate.
I don't
almost
know.
like I needed it. Like
I don't know.
The universe
Like
knew I needed it.
The last few months of being in dispatch, I don't really remember any funny calls.
Well, I just mean throughout your like 6-7 year career in dispatch.
There was always like, I had one guy one time tell me he figured out how to clone people, and it was a whole that call. I remember.
See,
it's like
that's what I mean.
You always know when somebody's got a good call too in dispatch, because they'll purposely start repeating out loud everything that person is saying.
Yes.
So like everybody in the dispatch center is like, what's going on? Like they're all like, oh, she's got a good one. She's got a good one. And it's
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, I'm sorry, did you just say you've cloned people before? And so everybody's like, oh, quiet. We got to hear this one. Like, so I had a guy. Yeah, that was probably like one of my favorite calls, because it was just like, he started the call off by telling me he needed the news there and he needed the police there, and he wanted to make sure that I knew he wasn't crazy because he had just been cleared at the hospital for being crazy. And I was like, oh, this is how we're starting the conversation off. I can't wait to hear how this goes. So, and that was, he had told me that he had cloned himself so many times that the clones took over his house and kicked him out. But he needed the police to meet him at a different address, because if he sent the police to his address, the clones would impersonate him and the officer would talk to a clone and not him. Yes.
Dude.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing too. This is something that I've said, especially in the open mic sessions that I've done with an audience, is what if sometimes when folks call that stuff in, what if it is actually true?
Listen,
and, like,
we had a bear here. Everybody kept calling in. Somebody reported this bear. And if you like, we're in like the lower part of Michigan. It's like, we're in Flint. Okay. So a bear being in Flint is just not something we had ever experienced. And everybody was like, okay, these people, somebody must have posted it on a page. So now everybody thinks they see this bear. Well, so we had reports one night where this lady's like, there's a bear on the roof of somebody's house. Well, we have a helicopter with Michigan State Police that flies around. And so we don't ever direct dispatch the Michigan State Police, but our dispatcher that night was like, hey, can you go over and check this house? This person says there's a bear on their roof. Of course, everybody's laughing, whatever. Well, so a couple nights later, we get reports that this lady, and we were like, what? And we're like, there's no way. But like, because it was like a passerby. We only got one call on it. And we're like, there's no way. And so one of our county medics teed up and was like, I'll go check it out, like kind of like, and she gets on stage. She's like, no, there is a dead bear on the highway. And we were like, wait a second. So who smoked the bear? Because a freaking raccoon will take a car out. And
right.
So who smoked the bear and kept going? Like, so yeah, dead bear. So yes, sometimes they are correct. Like we all joked about it for about 2 weeks, saying this was a joke, like there was no bear, and then there ended up being a dead bear on the highway. And
holy moly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for real. Like it had to have been a semi of some
That's
sort.
what we all said. It
Just
had to be a
clipped
semi.
it, and they never knew that they clipped it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, a bear, like that would do some damage. Especially like a 4-door sedan. It would just be like
done. And so we were just like, what happened? Like, who hit this bear? And nobody called it in. It was one passerby. Like, you get like a duck gets hit on the highway and everybody's calling that in, but a bear, nobody calls it in. Like, one call. Like,
even a small fender bender that's on the side of the highway, everyone has a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is calling, and it gets to the point where you're like, are you calling for such and such accident on the side of the highway? Is there anything different? You start asking those to triage, but not a bear. Like you would think that would be something that everyone would be calling. I don't know if you got this wrong, but there's like a bear or some sort of furry couch on the road.
A rug, maybe it's a rug. I don't know.
Right. Holy moly, man. Yeah. So there's all those different types of things, and so like for you, working towards the end of your dispatching career, like I said, there were 3 different calls we were talking about. I mean, you mentioned a school shooting that happened.
So the county just south of us, so like the last probably like 2, I shouldn't even say the last 2 months of my career as a dispatcher, but the last like 2 months of 2021, Oakland County, which is the county just south of us, they had a school shooting. That was pretty intense. I mean, and we in no way, shape, or form had it compared to like what Oakland County did. It was just one of those that hit really close to home. We have my daughter's dad lives in Oakland County. Like, I mean, it's like I'm like right on the border of Oakland County and Genesee. So it's one of those, we had officers whose kids went to Oakland County schools that were like rushing to the scene, like, because, it's their kids are in school there.
Right.
And then we ended up having a mall shooting in our county and we were very thankful that it was gang related and it wasn't like an active shooter situation. I think the last time I was on the podcast, we talked about my active shooter that I had, which was in that same year. It was in July of that year. But then we had the mall shooting. And that was stressful. We worked off 800 megahertz radios. As our officers were running in, we were losing connection with them because 800 megahertz radios do not work in like hospitals, malls, schools, things like that. So we were losing connectivity. Yeah, so we lost connectivity with our officers. Not only that, we were told that it was down the JCPenney's wing. So we had one. So in our county, one of the really unique things that our county does is we have county medics that work for our sheriff's department. So they are police officers and medics. So one of our medics had entered in like kind of one of the main doors. And all of the other officers had came in through JCPenney's because we had said it was down the JCPenney's wing, which it was. The thing is when the shooting happened, JCPenney's went into lockdown and pulled their gates down. So the only guy we had going in for this mall shooting, the officers couldn't get to him. They could see everything happening, but they couldn't get to him. And as he was going into the mall, there was a bounty hunter coming out and he's like, do you have anyone to cover you? And he's like, no. And he's like, well, I got a vest. Let's go. And so the bounty hunter is actually who covered our county medic going into the shooting. And then, like I said, we lost connectivity with them. That mall shooting was like a very stressful, we had like a whole debriefing with it. It was chaos. And we learned a lot from that shooting. Like I said, we were very fortunate. It was not an active shooter and it was gang related. So they went in, they got their targets and they got out. However, right. So we had that happen. We had a house explode in the middle of the night, which was like all related to consumers, but it exploded in the middle of the night. And then it also took out the 2 houses next to it. That was very, very stressful. I actually was not at 911 the night that happened. My parents lived right down the road from there and I happened to be at their house. And when it happened, somebody texted me and they're like, hey, like, what was that explosion? And I did not feel it. But my parents weren't hooked to the same consumer lines and somebody else felt it about 12 miles away because they were hooked to the same consumer lines and they could feel it, the vibrations from the ground all the way 12 miles away. So that was like, so I ended up texting my director. I was like, do you need me to go in? I said, because I was about 2 miles from the dispatch center. And he's like, yeah. I said, I'm just warning you, I'm in sweatpants. I'm not in uniform. He's like, that's fine. Just go. I was like, okay. So we got in there, and that was a very stressful night at work. And then I went to Hawaii. And I was like kind of cracking jokes. I'm like, thank goodness. Like, it was December. It was actually right around the Pearl Harbor anniversary. We had planned the whole trip around that because I love World War II stuff.
Mhm.
And so when I was in Hawaii, I'm like, this is just really great to hit the reset button going into 2022. I was like, because it's just been a really rough 2021. So I get back to dispatch. I get there, and I was like, my first day back, one of my buddies, I was going to be working South Radio the next day, and South Radio and Flint City Radio were like my two babies. Like, I loved those radios. And so our backup position, which handles like all of the lean stuff and like just all of the, just like alarm calls and like calls, like just like, hey, I need you to call this person back, call this person back. Like, you just get kind of handed all the like not fun stuff. You do a lot of the breaks. And he's like, hey, any chance you want to work backup tomorrow instead of South? And I was like, no, are you crazy? Like, I hate that position.
Yeah.
So I was feeling sick the next morning whenever I woke up, and I came into dispatch and I was like, hey, do you mind actually going ahead and switching me? I just don't feel well. And I told him, I said, if something happens, I just don't feel like I'm going to be able to give it to my A game. And I just want to make sure, whoever's working there can.
Right.
So we sit down, and the city, usually if like whoever gets to if you get to back up before the Flint City dispatcher does for shift change, you'll say, hey, I'm going to pull city up and I'll actually work city radio until that person gets there. So I was like, hey, if you want to go ahead and go, like, I'll pull city up. They're like, okay, cool. I get my headset on. I pull city radio up. I'm getting ready to work it. And I hear ping, and it's a stabbing. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I just logged in. And so Tommy, who had just switched me and was working South Radio, comes over and he's like, best trade ever. Like, kind of like cracking a joke.
Right.
Because I'm having to work a stabbing now. Like, I thought I wasn't, like, I was like, I just need to like, not relax, but I just need something where I'm not working heavy stuff. So I like, work the stabbing. The Flint City dispatcher comes in. And honestly, like, in Genesee County, stabbings are not, I'm not going to say as big of a deal. They're not rare for us. So it's not an uncommon call. So it wasn't as crazy, but so we're like sitting there. Well, so as the day is progressing and going on, we end up getting a call that is one of our county medics that says he's been hit. And so we ended up having 2 officers down that day. They were responding to a suspicious call. It was just supposed to be a normal call, nothing crazy. And the person that they responded on, if anybody's ever interested in looking at it, there is video footage from the actual shooting, so you can see what actually happens. But they were 2 of our newer police officers. Neither one of them had been on the road for a year. They both handled the call extremely well. Brandon, I am very close with him now. I did not know him before that. But I just remember when the call came in, I'm sitting backup radio, and I was just like, oh my gosh, because I felt terrible. Like, I felt like this whole dispatcher guilt, because Tommy is having to work this call. And I just felt like I just gave him so much, like, I just gave him PTSD. I just gave him all of this horrible stuff that was supposed to be me sitting in that position. And as the backup dispatcher, like, I was the one, like, I mean, like, I still worked the call because his main job was Brandon at the time. Brandon was one of the officers that had been shot. And so he was like, if you are not on scene and you're not with like Brandon or Dalton, like, get off the radio. Like, he literally told everyone, get off my air. Well, so as backup, we have a backup radio channel. So they all went to backup. So I'm dropping everybody on the call. So I still worked it, but it was just like, I felt like I had just given him this horrible, I don't know if burden is the right word, but just something he's going to carry with him for the rest of his life. I mean, and realistically, even I worked backup radio. It's something I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life, but it was something I really, really struggled with for a long time with Brandon and them's call. And, it was just, so we get through all those calls, and it's now, of course, that was December 21st. And so then, of course, we have like the 22nd and the 23rd off, but then it's our team's job to work December 24th and December 25th. So we were like also working Christmas that year. And I just remember working Christmas, and at Genesee County, one of the great things I will say that I absolutely love that they do this. They do these letters of like commendation. So whenever there's like heavy calls that are there, like we had an officer that was hit on the side of the highway doing a traffic stop. whenever that happened, they go through and they will list the positions that every single person in the dispatch center is sitting. And then they fill out this thing that it's like a letter that says what happened. And like, everybody did a great job. It goes in your file. And so it's really cool. Well, so at the end of the year, they will go through them and look at them. So our director came in and he brought Christmas dinner in for everybody. And he's like, hey, kiddo, can I talk to you for a second? And he always calls me kiddo. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I go and talk to him. He's like, how are you doing? And I was like, honestly, not good. And he's like, all right. He goes, I just wanted to check on you. He said, I was going through some calls. He said, and your name was on all of our heavy calls this year. He said, all of the calls that he's like, your name, he said, I had one name on all of those and it was yours. And he goes, I just wanted to check on you. I said, I'm just letting you know, I'm not doing okay. I said, I do see a therapist. Whenever I had started, actually, when I was going through the breakup with my child's father and then like trying to navigate all of the 911 stuff. And then I got in there and realized there was a lot more than just those two big things that we needed to work through. Yeah. But I was like, he knew her by name as well, because it's like one of his friends. And I was like, I've already contacted Tammy. I was like, so she's already aware. And actually, Tammy messaged me that day and is like telling you dispatcher, like, because she's very involved with first responders in our county. And so she's like, if you need anything or if anybody up there needs anything, like, I'm going to set time aside for you guys. And so I was like, I appreciate it so much. And so I was like, I'm already talking to Tammy. I said, but I'm just letting you know, like, I do think this was the, like almost like my last straw. Like, I was like, I'm going to probably be stepping away. And I just want to give you a heads up. I said, I don't know when, I just know that it's time. Because the night of Brandon and Dalton's shooting, I came home to pick Aspen up from my parents' house. And, as like single parents, which I like, you and I have talked about that, like, I'm very passionate about single parenting because I've been a single parent for the last 6 years. And it's not easy in dispatch. I don't think single parenting is easy at all. But like for me, especially in dispatch, like as a single parent, you struggle with like, dispatch gets so much of your time. And it's hard to say no because, you're helping people out, or at least you think you're helping people out. And it's like, how do I say no to that? But then for every hour you spend in the dispatch center is an hour away from your kid. And it's like, and then if it's time for your kid to be with you and not the other parent, it's not even that they're with the other parent, they're with a babysitter. Or, I mean, and I'm very fortunate. I know I'm very fortunate. A lot of people don't get this, but my mom and her, my ex's mom, she's a very good friend of mine. So Aspen's grandma, I always call her Aspen's grandma because she is Aspen's grandma. So Aspen's grandma and my mom, which is also her grandma, are very involved with her life. So we are very fortunate that we have them to help out. But Aspen she's not with a parent. So it's like, you feel like that parental guilt, but then if you don't go to work, you feel like the coworker guilt. Like there's a lot that goes on with that. And so I was pretty good at like keeping work life and home life separate, like not bringing the stresses like to each other. And the night of Brandon's shooting, I remember going home to get Aspen, and my dad had known what had gone on at work. And he was like, hey honey, like how was work? And it was just his way of checking on me to see like how I was doing. And I remember I just snapped on it. I was like, how do you think work was, Dad? Like, how do you think it was? And I remember like instantly, like whenever I said that, I felt so guilty because I was just like, oh my gosh, like he's just checking on me because he knows it was a rough day. And he even took it a step further and he goes, like, he was trying to be so calm and he like just just checking on me. And he goes, well, he's like, he's like, I actually saw an accident today. And he's like, the county, like there was a county car, like a sheriff's department car. And the guy that got out the car, he looked so young. And I was like, it was Brandon that he had seen. It was the call right before Brandon got shot. And I was like, that was the officer that got shot, Dad. That was our officer that was down. So then I was like, you're making it worse. Like, please.
Oh, no.
Like, so I was just like, it was just like everything with that. And so and I realized I had always promised myself that whenever I started realizing I was bringing work home, that it was going to be time to step back from dispatch because I don't, like in our family dynamic, I don't have anybody else at home as a buffer. Like, so whenever I get home from 911, like I told like a lot of people when they leave the dispatch center, like there's like two types of people. They either blare music or they ride in silence. I was a ride in silence person because I did not want, like, I just needed that peace and quiet when I drove home. Cause I knew once I got home, like there was no silence because it's my daughter and now I get to be mom. And so when you get home from dispatch, like if I'm having a rough day with some calls, I didn't have the luxury of being able to be like, hey, like, can you watch Aspen for a few minutes? Like, just give me 15 minutes to just kind of decompress from the day. There's nobody else there. And she was too young. It wasn't even like I could be like, hey, like, you need to go turn on a show, like, give mom a few minutes. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like, she was 2 years old whenever I became a single mom. And so it was just like, and at the time of all of this happening, Aspen was 5. So it's like, like you come home and you're dealing with all of this, and it was really hard. And so I just promised myself, if I brought it home, I was going to step down, because it's not fair to her to have to give up all of her time with me. And then when I do come home, not be the parent she needs, because
right.
And at the end of the day, like, as much as I had a really hard time stepping down. I struggled with it. As a matter of fact, I told Tim on December 25th of 2021 I was going to step down. I did not actually start looking for another job until May. And then I ended up getting hired, and my last day in dispatch was in July. So it wasn't like an instant process. It wasn't like a rash decision. It was something I really let sit, because I really did struggle with, like, who am I now? Like, what's my identity? Like, what am I? And then there was also, like, I was proud to be a dispatcher. I was good at being a dispatcher. And then, like, going from a job that I was good at, like, and to just hear, like to be like I felt like I was letting people down. Our dispatch staff was extremely low. So I'm like, I know when I leave, it's going to create more overtime for them. So there was, like, that guilt, but I was just like, I've got, like, I have to do it, because it's not right for me anymore. And, like, if I'm being honest, like, I really felt God, like, pushing me, like, hey, you have got, like, you need to do this. And, like, I know that some people find this, like, cliche or whatever. And I just feel like, I don't know, like, I just felt like God had a bigger plan for me. And, like, dispatch was my stepping stone to get wherever he's guiding me. I don't know where that is yet. I'm just kind of going with the motions right now. But it was something that was really hard for me. And I struggle with it now sometimes, like sitting on this podcast. I don't technically dispatch anymore. So it's like, where, like, am I in the right spot? Like, are there people that are going to be like, she doesn't even wear a headset anymore. Like, why is she sitting here? But it's like one of those things. Like, I don't want anybody to ever feel like their time in the dispatch chair was irrelevant. Even 20 years from now, like, my mom, she actually worked in a police station. She answered 911 calls before, like, their area had 911. And that's probably where, like, my interest for 911 came from. And so, like, sometimes I would talk to her about calls, because I was like, she kind of understands a little bit, and she just did this as like for a year. Like, it wasn't anything crazy, but it was nice to have that. And sometimes you just get to be the sounding board for some people. Like they just, like, I was in the Louisiana conference. There was a girl that walked by, because I travel all over, much like you. My travel is about to start and go hardcore, like you were saying, from September to November. It's just like bam, 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 bam.
Yes.
But we were in Louisiana at a conference, and this girl, I remember she just walked by very, like, she wasn't happy. And most dispatchers at conferences are happy, like, even if they don't enjoy all of the classes that are there. They're at least like, hey, I'm not answering a phone, and I'm getting
yes.
Like, let me go see what free stuff I can get from the vendors. Like, what do we got going on? And the Louisiana conference, honestly, is a lot of fun. Like, I don't know if you've ever been. Louisiana conference is a lot of fun. Highly recommend. But I'm also from Louisiana, so there's that. But we're at the Louisiana conference. This girl walks by, and she's just very, like, just kind of, I don't know, like, there was just no emotion. Like, there wasn't bad emotion. There was just, so I, like, kind of, like, started talking to her, and she actually had just taken a really bad call. And so her and I were like, I was just talking to her, and I was like, listen, I get it. Like, there are days you just come home and you just need a few minutes to just decompress. And one of the things, I went to a Mackinac Island conference, to our conference here in Michigan. And I remember sitting through one of these classes talking about mental health. And I remember them telling me that they were telling the whole class, not just me, but they were talking about how when you come home, you give yourself 15 minutes. Give yourself 15 minutes, but nothing more than those 15 minutes. Because whenever you give yourself those extra minutes, you're sitting there sulking, and it's almost getting worse. Like, you've got 15 minutes, set a timer. And they were saying they actually encourage spouses to come to this class, or somebody who's very close to you. And they said, because you need to be the person that makes sure after those 15 minutes that they get those 15 minutes, but then after those 15 minutes, they're able to move on and pull them out of that. And so her and I were talking about that. And I said, I just remember them thinking, I said, and that was something that if I felt like it was a bad call, I would allow myself to drive the extra way home And I said, I don't know that it was 15 minutes, but if I had a bad day, I would start driving the long way home because I actually had to get home, but it gave me a couple extra minutes to process everything that had happened, like with work and stuff. And I said, that's what I used because I didn't have that extra person at home to pull me out of it. I said, you'll have to figure out how to do it. But that was what I tried to use to pull me out of like the funk of the day, because you do still have life when you get outside of work, everybody does. And it's like you just drained your bucket, and it's like you need something to fill it up. And it's just it was just one of those and sometimes if my dispatch experience, if almost 7 years in the dispatch center helped her out, and that's all it helps out, then by all means, because you could see that. And she just was like, thank you so much, because she was like, I just needed to hear somebody say like they had been through it. And it was like, yeah. And the thing is we don't all have the same calls, but we all have the same emotions. We all have the same emotions with them. That's
very true.
And I think, and I tell people all the time too, you don't know there are calls that can affect me that do not affect the same person. For somebody, they might be like, I can handle those calls all day long. Suicide calls are a huge call for me. Like those calls I will sit on. I have had people very close to me that have committed suicide. So it is a very sensitive thing. So I would sit on those calls and I would really try and talk to them. And I would try to go to the extra mile, because I know what it's like. I don't know what it's like to be them, but I know what it's like to be their family member. And that's something that I don't want anybody else to have to go through. And if me sitting on the phone, if the person that I know would have reached out to a 911 dispatcher to tell them, even if they were just calling to say, hey, this is where I'm at, if that I know I would have wanted that dispatcher to go the extra mile. So maybe we didn't get the phone call we got. And so so suicide calls are a really big thing for me. Whereas other calls, I'm like, not whatever, but I can handle these, and they don't affect my emotions as much.
Right.
And
it's not like an alarm call or a barking dog, loud noise complaint. Like this is someone's life,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just some people who may have really hard calls. I don't know, I really, really struggled with people who were on hospice whenever they would call those calls in, because my grandpa was on hospice during a certain time period. And so I really associated with those calls. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, but then after my grandpa had passed away, not that they didn't affect me at all, but they just weren't as close to me, because it was like we've moved, we've gone through this phase. And I'm like, and I tell, whenever I would train people, I would tell people, I'm like, listen, you're gonna have calls that sometimes just affect you more, and you're like, why did that one hit me more? And a lot of times the calls have to do with the season of life you're in. I was like, whenever you're in certain seasons of life, certain calls affect you more than others. I was like, and certain calls don't affect you at all, because you're like, well, I'm going through this. It may be something that you're going through, and you're like, come on, we got to get through this. Almost like you're helping them get through it. We don't have time to sulk. Work with me on this. Let's get through it and let's move through it, because you're going through it. And you're like, hey, I know how we can get through this. I'm going to help you. And then other times you may work through it and then have a really rough call where you're just like, hey, I need a few minutes. Give me a few minutes. And so I think just giving yourself grace in the dispatch center, but with the grace you give yourself, it is so important to give your coworkers grace, because we are the most judgmental people in the dispatch center. When people get emotional, we're like, oh, come on, suck it up. We deal with this all day long. Wait, this is what's going to do it for you. Yeah, that might be what did it for him, because they might have taken 6 really heavy calls, and the little call might have been the one that sent them over. So give them some grace. You have no idea what's going on. And I can't stress that enough, because I have walked into some dispatch centers and you can just sense the tension in the room. And it's with all of the hatred the world spews at you, especially as dispatchers. I tell people all the time, you do not get a good call on dispatch. Your coworkers are all you have to lean on. And sometimes I think that, like I said, we just get so judgmental in the dispatch center, almost like, oh, I'm tougher than that person. I can handle those calls good. And it's and I'm not going to say that's every dispatch center, but you do see that so often. And it's just you see that when you sit in a classroom full of dispatchers from all different, from all different areas. I'm sure you've seen, whenever you do your, at conferences, whenever you do that, there are people that'll sit there and be like, oh, okay, this is the one that did it for you. And it's yeah, that might be the one that did it for him, because you have no idea all of the underlying things.
Because there's a different experience that everybody has in their life that associates to one of those calls. That's why it's the one that broke the camel's back, so to speak. But I think that, and that's also why I wanted to talk about this piece as well, because everything that you've said, that is, sometimes a lot of us, the profession defines us, and we need not to, we got to find different avenues so that it doesn't define us like
Mhm.
that. I think if or so that we don't feel as though it just fully defines us. Like I
Yep.
said, when you get out, then you're like, who am I?
Yeah.
What do I do now? And I think that's why it makes that transition out of dispatch a little harder too, because now you're not in the thick of it. You're not
Mhm.
literally within the trenches of 911 anymore. And I've been out for 11 years, and you know, and I do all this stuff. I'm still going around and teaching and doing all these other things. But don't get me wrong. I mean, there have been a few times where I'm like, I don't know, like, will people still listen because I haven't been in there for so long, but I started all this other stuff, and I'm helping dispatch. Like, you get into those modes, and
Yeah.
everybody does. And I feel like a lot more. And I told you this in the beginning, and I'll say it now for those who are watching and listening. I have received messages from people that I know personally, and people that I've never met before, but who are just fans of the podcast and the I Am 911 movement, saying that their transition out of dispatch has been very, very hard. Like,
Mhm.
there are a lot of people too who have said, I was able to put this on the shelf. It never bothered me at all. But now that I'm out, it's all coming back.
Mhm.
And I don't know what to do. I don't know who to reach out to because I'm not in it anymore. I don't have, there's no EAP or anything like that. They're, getting help through a therapist and everything, right? But not just that, they want to be able to talk to their colleagues,
Yeah.
from the profession, but they feel like they can't because they're not in it anymore. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, we need to do something. Like, we need to bring this conversation up and out. So for you, as you went through all of those calls and you're transitioning out, you had that one last one where you told I can't never remember, is Tim the
Tim.
deputy director or the director?
Tim is the director now. He was
Okay,
the
the
deputy
director.
director for a while, but he is the
That's
director
why.
now.
That's
Yeah,
why it
yeah.
was confusing me, right? And
Yep.
Dave is now the deputy, right?
That's correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So you're telling Tim, like, this is like, I'm telling you now that I'm getting close, or this is going to
Mhm.
be it, and I'm going to start transitioning out. Up until that point, and how were those things, like, what were some of those thoughts and feelings that you had going out? Because I know for me, and I think you kind of said this already, or we're just moving towards the same direction, or the same feelings, is that when I knew that I was going, and I had already put in my time and stuff, it was hard. Like, I felt like I was betraying my team.
Mhm.
I felt like I was leaving everybody behind, and they just basically were like, choose yourself,
Yeah.
not in those exact words, but everybody, the way they were talking, it was basically like that, choose yourself, your family, whatever's going to be better, what you're going to be doing is going to be helping us and everybody else out, with what you're doing. But I didn't see it that way in the beginning. In the beginning, I was like, I'm not gonna be able to reach out to them anymore. I'm not gonna be able to talk to these officers, or people aren't gonna see me the same way because now I'm out, and I'm gonna be on the outside. And I think there's a lot of people out there who feel as though they are on the outside as well. But it's just that feeling that we get, because I still visit the center now. I still have friends there. I still
Mhm.
talk to them. But it was that initial thought process of like, damn, now who am I?
Yeah, because whenever I was going through like the transition, and I'll say even before I like got out of the dispatch center, when I was like trying to decide what I wanted to do, because realistically, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to still be involved with 911 in some way, shape, or form. And I actually joke, I tell directors this all the time. I was like, I knew how to work my console. I had no idea what it took to make the console work. So trying to figure all of that out was a very big learning curve of like what part I wanted to work in.
Yeah.
So like that alone, like just trying to figure out that aspect of it. I will say when I got hired on at Entrado, like the guy that hired me on at Entrado, his name is Dave Tima. He is
Mhm.
if you ever see Dave Tima at a conference, and he's probably going to kill me for saying this because he gets drug all over at conferences. He's fantastic. Go talk to him. Like the guy has never worked in a dispatch center. And for someone who has never worked in a dispatch center, he is so passionate about like just making dispatchers' lives easier. Like he just always has like dispatchers at the forefront of his brain. So he's like my hype guy, like really, like even still, like he kind of like cracks jokes with me, like because he actually is no longer over my team. But whenever I got hired in, I remember him just like really putting like the spotlight on how important I was to our team because of my dispatch history. And like that really helped me with the transition. I think just realizing like, hey, I do still have an identity. And like the stuff with dispatch was not necessarily, I don't want to say like it was a waste, because it wasn't. And I would say for anybody that's like struggling with their identity, like coming out of the dispatch center, or I should say coming out from underneath the headset.
Yes.
One of the things that is most important to do, and I would say this, and I guess, you know, if you think about it, it's kind of like being in a relationship. When you get out of a relationship, you're trying to figure out like, okay, did I like these things because the person I was with liked these things, or did I like them because it was actually me? Take the time to remember who you are as a person. Like, did I do these things because it's the only thing I had time for when I worked in dispatch, or because it was somehow affiliated with dispatch, or was it because I actually liked it? Take the time and take the things out of your life that you're like, oh, I actually did not enjoy these things, because those are going to weigh on you. And make room for things, learn new things, like figure out new things that like I'm not going to lie, I had forgot how much I loved cooking. I love cooking. And so like if you follow me on Facebook at all, you will constantly see posts. As a matter of fact, I just posted I made a homemade apple pie the other night, and like tonight is meatloaf and cheesy potatoes. So it's like you can come
I
up.
love all of that.
How long's the drive? There's some apple pie left.
I'll be over.
Yeah. So, but like I really forgot how much I loved cooking. No, I did not forget how much I hate to clean up, but
Yes.
So it's like getting back to that. Like I loved when I was sat in dispatch. I crocheted a lot. I think there's probably a lot of people that watch the podcast that are involved in 911. They're probably like, yes, crocheting and knitting you will see in almost every dispatch center.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I had to just figure out, like everybody's like, and I had to figure out, was that something I actually enjoyed, or was that something I just did to pass the time in dispatch? Fun fact, I do actually enjoy crocheting. So,
right. Well, there you go.
But I think figuring out who you are as an individual is so important, because at the end of the day, if something happens where your dispatch career is stripped from you, whether it's because you stepped down or because you maybe some things happen, it's retirement, or it just got to be too much. Like that is okay. Like, because you are so much more as a person than everything that goes on at 911. And it's, I know it's hard. Like, and part of the things that we love in dispatch is feeling like we're helping people. You can still help people outside of dispatch, even if it's, and I just think that's so important for people to remember. And honestly, like, I mean, if you still want to be someone involved in 911 stuff, like, feel free to message me. I can give you all sorts of ways to still be involved in 911. You can get involved with APCO and Nina and not be underneath the headset anymore. There are so many things that you can do if you still want to be involved with 911, or even just helping with like education about 911. Like, helping educate the public helps dispatchers so much. Like, there's so many different things we can do if you still want to help 911, or maybe you just need to walk away completely, and that's okay too. Those are all okay things. You just need to figure out and just keep that, whatever you have to do to keep reminding yourself of that, because there are going to be days where you doubt it so much. Like, okay, like, is this really, did I really make the right choice? Or even maybe, like, I'm not going to lie, there has been times where I've been tempted to go back part-time. And I keep telling myself, like, I'm like, why are you wanting to go back part-time? Is it because you're wanting that part of your identity back? Is it because you're wanting to help the dispatchers out? Like, what is your reasoning? And I have to like really dig into the nitty-gritty of what is it exactly that I want to go back for part-time. And a lot of times if I sit with that for a while, I'm like, it's not that you really want to go back part-time. You just feel left out. And it's okay. Like, and it's okay. Like, those are all okay things. Just find it's okay to be involved in other things. Like, you're not betraying anybody. You're not. And I will say this for the dispatchers that have stepped down because maybe it got to be too much. I am one of you. Like, I stepped down because it got to be too much. It does not mean in any way, shape, or form that you are weak. Because I feel like that is definitely a struggle. Like, when I was stepping down, I was like, oh, how many of my coworkers are going to judge me? Like, oh, well, you only made it to the 7-year mark, but I've been here for, I don't know, 18 or 15 or whatever the year. And it's like, okay, like, I get it. Like, and the thing is, it doesn't matter. Like, that's everybody else's pace and that's everybody else's race to run. And if that's what they want, but you also have to understand, like, that might dispatch might be a stepping stone to get you to where you need to be at in life. And that might be a really great, it might be a really amazing stepping stone that you had and you can look back on and you can learn from that stepping stone, but you have to keep moving forward. Like those stepping stones are there to move forward, not to move back on. And if dispatch presents itself in the next stepping stone, then that's great too. But you have to keep stepping forward and just understand that this is part of your life process. It's not your whole life. And I think that's such an important thing for us to remember. And it's hard because it does get infiltrated in us. We do have, like, we're sitting in the dispatch center for 12 to 16 hour shifts. When we get out, we're hanging out with dispatch people or like first responders. And like, it's so hard. And I did have to, I mean, if you talk to a lot of my first responder friends, they will tell you, I distanced myself from them for a while after I stepped down because I was just like, I felt very left out. Like I was sitting there and I'd be sitting with like, there's like a bunch of police officers and stuff like that. They'd all be talking about the call they responded on that day. I don't know what call you went on that day. I'm not involved anymore. And
Yeah,
I remember
you're like, okay.
I was sitting with well, because I feel like whenever they're all together, like it's all the police officers and then the spouses, because the spouses are like, yeah, just let them go do their thing. I was like in the middle because I'm like, I've always been with like the first responders. And now I'm like, I remember sitting there one day, we were sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they're like, well, I was like, this is all we talked about for you guys. And they're like, yes, it's so annoying. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And so we were sitting there and they were like, one of the officers was like, are you too good to join in our conversation now? And I was like, no, but like, aren't we all friends for reasons other than just the calls we took today? Like, is anybody going on vacations this year? And I remember being like trying to bring up things that were not first responder related, and that was just like something we didn't talk about. Like we never, like I remember they were like vacations and I was like, yeah, like me and my friends outside of the first responder world will talk about things we did this week that aren't involving 911. And whenever I realized, like, so a lot of the people that we could only talk about first responder things, like the calls they went on, and it was something that we constantly talked about, I kind of had to step away a little bit because I was like, this is not the, I don't know if that's a friendship or a trauma bond at that point.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so it was like, you know, I mean, these are people I can call on if anything happens. Like, I mean, but they're also the first responders. They would be the ones I'd be calling on anyway. So it's like trying to figure out that balance was also very hard. I think it did help me. And like, there are still people, like, as I stepped away, there are still people, like, I'm supposed to eat lunch tomorrow with one of the girls that's a medic here in our county. Like, you know, there are still people I am close friends with, but to take a lot of the people out that, and it's not that I don't care about them or anything like that, but to have them as my close inner circle, I just don't think it was necessarily healthy because I was constantly comparing myself. I constantly felt more left out because I would see all of the things I wasn't a part of that day instead of seeing the things that I was a part of for everyone else. And so I think that's just important.
I think that I feel like every single episode that I've ever recorded for this podcast has been very, very powerful. I think this one especially, because this is a topic that I think a lot of people are also starting to think about. And a lot of people that are transitioning out are feeling this way. So thank you for being candid and open about your feelings. And, you know, you've helped me bring out some stuff as well, because I felt that way too. I think what helped us in a sense, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like what has helped both of us be able to transition a little better than others might have is only because we've still stayed in 911 through a certain aspect, and others have had to try to figure out how to do something that might not match that, you know, giving back or doing something bigger than yourself. But, you know, you have to find a level playing field there with whatever it is that you're transitioning into, and knowing that you're still able to give back in different ways. And it's very possible now for you as well, because we only have a few a little more time here. What I want to make sure to mention though is, while you're going through all of this, you're making your transition out, there was something that was happening the whole time, at least the 6 years worth of your dispatching career, which also correlates with what we're segueing into as well, is this new podcast that you have coming out. And how your experience from those last 6 years in dispatch into what you've been doing and what you're going into now with this new project that is built up. The fact that you were also a single mom, you mentioned your daughter Aspen, and all these different things that you were going through. And I want to know how the experience of dealing with a lot of that and transitioning out is going into this new podcast. So tell us the name of the podcast, what it's about, but also how, kind of this experience is built up into this. Cause I think this is also very important. I believe that there's probably a lot of folks, men and women, who are dealing with the same thing. And even those who are married, who might feel, or in a
They might
relationship,
feel
not
like a
even
single
just married.
parent.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Not just married,
yeah.
but just in a relationship in general that might feel like a single parent as well. Tell us about this.
So the podcast is called Open Your Ears. It's
Yep.
the Open Your Ears podcast. We are going to be launching our first episode in September. So I'm like super excited about that. Yeah, super excited. This is a project that I have struggled with for a very long time with moving forward with, because one of the things that really helped me with coping on different calls in the dispatch center is I'm a Christian. So my faith was very huge on that. When I first started dispatch, I literally went in and applied to Genesee County. I came outside from applying. I handed them my resume and everything, and they said, "Can you stay and take a test?" Sure, I'll stay and take a test. I remember like staying there taking a test. One of the officers had hit his lovely red button, and I heard like everything go off in the dispatch center. And I remember I'm in the middle of like taking this timed test, and I like stopped. I thought a bank was being robbed because of how loud everything. I'm like, is there a bank robbery happening right now? Like, what's going on? And so I remember coming out from taking that test, and I looked down at my phone, which I had left in the car because I just was dropping my resume off. I didn't know I was going to be in there for a while. And I was working construction at the time. My boss had called to lay me off while I was applying at 911, which I kind of knew was coming because we're in Michigan. My job wasn't as important in construction, so I knew it was like coming, which is why I started looking for a new job. So I was like, oh, I'm glad I just applied to 911. Like, I just got laid off, like, while I was putting in this application. I go home the next day. I took a pregnancy test and found out I was pregnant. And so I was like, this is a really rough 48 hours. Like
right. Yeah.
Not planning on this. My daughter's dad and I were not married, but we were together. And so I had Aspen, and we got engaged actually right before Aspen's first birthday. The wedding got called off a month before it was supposed to happen. So I was sitting in, I was working dispatch, and like all of this stuff, you've got everything bad happening in dispatch. Well, then I went through this breakup like a month before my wedding is supposed to happen. And I remember like Dave and Tim were great, and they were like, hey, like if you need some time off. I was like, I don't want any time off. Like, I just want to work through this, like power through it. And when the actual date of the wedding comes, I had taken time off for that. I was like, if I could just have my time then, because I feel like that's probably going to be a little more emotional for me because everything's going to hit me then, So I became a single mom while I was working in dispatch, and that was hard. It was so hard because it was like on top of me figuring out it's hard having kids in dispatch, because they don't understand why you're giving up time. They just know you're giving up the time with them. And they don't understand how much you're truly helping people. And so in your mind, you're like, listen, you got to understand, I'm trying to help these people. I'm doing this to help others, but all they see is this is my mom that I'm not getting to see because she's more worried about somebody else. So you have that parental guilt, but then as a single parent, now I'm having to share my daughter. So I don't have her at home all the time. And granted, we did work out a really great schedule. So the days essentially that I was working, he had her, but that meant that every single day that I was not scheduled to work, so on my off days, was when I had her. And so there was never that just downtime to just have a second to breathe. And when you don't have anybody else at home to have those few minutes to breathe, that means you're either staying up super late once she goes to sleep to have a couple minutes to decompress, or you're waking up super early, and most of the time for me, I was doing both. So the sleep is going, you're losing a lot of sleep. And I know parents lose sleep. I'm not saying only single parents lose sleep, but that was my only time that I got to have a few minutes. And, so that was something I really struggled with. But then as a Christian, that was not something, single parenting was not something that I felt comfortable just going and talking to my pastor about, because realistically, in my mind, I'm a single parent because I got pregnant out of wedlock. So that was not it's almost like a taboo topic we don't talk about. And realistically,
right.
So who's helping me navigate through this? And it's trying to navigate through that. I still had Tammy, my therapist, and stuff like that. But there was times I didn't want to talk to Tammy. I just wanted somebody to just understand me and because she has to be objective, right? I needed somebody
Right.
who was not objective. I just need you to be there for me, like, and help me navigate. And so I really felt like God was dealing with me in a lot of the stuff that I experienced as being a single parent. I had a very dear friend of mine tell me one time, they're like, listen, I feel like you've been through a lot as a single parent and you could help a lot of single parents out, especially when it comes to navigating through the Christian life, because we don't talk about that enough. Like, you know, people end up in divorce. That's frowned upon in the church. People are, and the fact is, we are in these situations, so we need to address them. And so he's like, I just really feel like you could be. And I'm like, I don't know how I want to do this. Like, I do feel like God's leading me to do this, but I don't know how. And so I just really struggled with it. And then one day I was doing my devotions, and there's a devotion book I did, and it's called Discerning the Voice of God. And so it was just because I just felt like I had strayed so much in my relationship with Christ, and I was needing something to just help me reaffirm. And I told my mom, I said, I don't know anymore if I'm hearing God's voice in my head or my own voice, because I tend to do what I want. So I'm like, I need some guidance on how to discern if it's my voice or God's voice I'm listening to, because my voice is really loud. So I did this devotion called Discerning the Voice of God. And as I was doing it, there's a verse in the Bible that talks about opening your ears to hear the words of wisdom from people that have already been through these experiences, so you can learn from them, so you don't have to go through the same struggles they went through. And I just remember like going through that, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that is so much what we need. So that's where the Open Your Ears podcast came from, was that Bible verse, and just talking about, and I'm not saying like I am just so full of wisdom, people need to listen to me. I'm going to have guests on the show that I think will be full of wisdom. And I'm very like in the first episode, I go through and talk about how important it is, like just kind of what we're going to be going through and talking about. And one of the things I really touch base on is for single parents. I said there will be things for everybody on this podcast I think you can take away from it, even if you're not a parent, just because you know parents. And not every topic is going to cover parent. Not every topic is going to be all these parenting things. Like, it's not going to be just infiltrated with that. But I do think it's very important. One of the things I talk about is single parenting, like for parents who became pregnant out of wedlock. Maybe you're a single parent because divorce. One of the things I talk about is maybe you lost your spouse. Maybe there's multiple things that are there. I said, or maybe, like you and I had mentioned, one of the things I cover is maybe you are in a relationship and you feel like a single parent because the other person is just not present. Or maybe they're working all the time. Or, I mean, there's military spouses that are single parenting, but they're very much in a relationship because their spouse is overseas defending our country. Like, there's all these things that we can relate to. And I just think it's so important for us. And one of my friends that I worked in dispatch, when the officer's down, he is a single dad, and his spouse had passed away. So he's a single dad in the aspect of he's a widower. And so it's just like, like bringing people on there that can share their stories. Not only does I think that it'll help people that are listening to know that there are people out there, but it's also kind of like therapeutic for people to be able to tell their story as well. So I think it'll help the people that are able to speak about it. And so I just think, like, if that's all, I don't, if we get 2 listeners, by all means, if it means that people can come on and tell their story. I will tell you right now, if you listen to it and you see that it is me and my sister, just be prepared for all sorts of shenanigans, because she will be on there. And listen, I tell people all the time, if you know me, people think I'm sassy. My mom has 3 daughters, and I promise I am the least sassy of all 3 of them. My mom will tell you I am the least sassy of all 3 of them. She came in dispatch one day and nobody believed me when I said that. And so one of the girls was like, Miss Melissa, I need to ask you, who is the least sassy of your 3 daughters? And she's like, oh, Christa. And I was like, I told you. And they're like, the other 2 are worse. And I'm like, yes, they are worse. I promise. Like,
That's
in the best
hilarious.
way possible. Like, we just don't put up with certain things. Like, and we're from the South, so we can say it very nicely. Like, I'm not rude about it whenever I say it.
Oh, it's one of those bless your heart things.
Yes. Like, oh, that was so nice. Thank you so much for that. Like, like it's just like one of those that we learned it from our mom, though, so it's her fault.
That is amazing. I'm excited for your project, for this new podcast and everything. You mentioned earlier how you don't know, if you hear either Christ's voice, God's voice, whose ever voice, or your own voice, or where you're supposed to be going, but you feel like you're being led by whatever it might be, you're being led in a direction. And I feel like the title of this is perfect. And you are, in a way, like you said, you're not saying that you yourself, that you are that voice of wisdom, but in a sense, just you simply speaking from your experience to allow others to be able to open up and be vulnerable. Those are the types of speakers, those are the types of people, teachers, whichever, that I love listening to. A person who gives a little bit of themselves to the audience, because that's how we relate with each other. We are all, in a way, in some way, even if it's the basic foundation or whichever of whatever concept it is that you're talking about, we are connected in that way. And you talking about your experience and then having others come on and people listening, that's a version of the word of wisdom. So thank you for jumping into this. Like, this is, I'm excited for what you have coming. And so as we're going into the wrap up of the episode, where can people find out more about the Open Your Ears podcast?
So I have a Facebook page, Open Your Ears Podcast, and we also have it on Instagram. We're doing little announcements here and there for different things. So those would be the two that I tell you to follow first. And then you'll see some announcements later on next week of just different things with it. But I will tell you, just because everybody here is like dispatch related, I had a very like surreal moment when I was recording the first episode. I actually got really choked up because like we're talking about like identity as a dispatcher. And when I slipped the headset on the first time to record the podcast, it was a very surreal moment for me.
Oh, wow.
Like I'm actually getting a little emotional because it was like I went from wearing one headset to like slipping this headset on, and like I feel like it was so meaningful to wear my dispatch headset, and I just hope that this headset is just as meaningful for me as that one was. And I just remember I took a picture of me wearing my headset and I sent it to a couple of my buddies, and I was like, wearing a new headset now, like this is not, like it was like a couple of my officer friends and some of my dispatch friends, and I was like, just very surreal to be sitting here with like another headset on. Like when I slipped it on, I literally just sat in my chair for a minute and just had to like, it was just a lot of emotions, like just kind of like, oh wow, like this is another headset. Like it's, I mean, you got the headset on right now, so
it's your continuation of service.
Yes,
that's what it is. So this is awesome. When you have it coming out, I'll make sure to share as well.
Thank you.
So I've got a question for you going into the wrap up of this, and it's not the question that I always ask all of the guests because you've been on before. This is a different one, and this goes along with something that I've put out there before, and it's all about if I could tell you one thing. So for those who are watching and listening, let's just talk about the profession and some things that we would want people to know, especially now that you transitioned out and everything. Let's just say you're talking to your friends or family, even that as well, whichever direction you want to go. But as for the 911 profession, the job that you did, if I could tell you one thing, but from your perspective, like what would you tell someone?
And that's working in the profession right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would tell them there's going to be days you go into dispatch and your confidence is going to be so high. You're going to be, maybe it's because of something that happened in life. Maybe it's because of the day before was a really great day for you. You had a really rough call that you handled well. You may not leave the dispatch center feeling the same way you did when you walked in, and that's okay. Because it's such a wave of emotions. You may go into the dispatch center and you may have had a really bad call the day before, and you go in there and you're just not feeling like yourself whenever you walk in. And by the end of the day, you may feel great. Those are different emotions, but to ride the roller coaster of emotions, do not put that roller coaster of emotions on a shelf somewhere and just let it fester. When those things tend to fester, that is whenever they weigh on you the most. And I know it's hard, especially because we don't let our emotions out very much in dispatch. If we do, I mean, we crack jokes in the most inappropriate ways. And as a matter of fact, I think I told you about how Tommy had came over to me and said best trade ever whenever I took over that thing for him.
Yeah.
Like as a little like nugget of funniness in the dispatch center, because we all have, you know, a weird sense of humor. After the shooting had happened and everything started to calm down and we found out Brandon and Dalton were going to be okay, I tiptoed over to Tommy's chair and I whispered in his ear and I went, "Best trade ever." Like, because he had to deal with all of that chaos later on. But it's okay, like the emotions that you go through in the dispatch center, if your emotions are not what everybody else's in the room are, that's okay too. And if you end up having to walk away from dispatch for a season or just completely, give yourself that grace. I cannot stress enough about giving yourself the grace. And if you're struggling with it afterwards, know that, I mean, like, you're there, I'm here. Jim Marshall is a fantastic person to reach out to. Like, he was a very big sounding board for me with some stuff that happened in our dispatch center. There are lots of people out there. Like, don't be afraid to reach out to one of us. We may not have all the answers for you, but we can help you get the answers. And I just am so big on that. Like, just making sure that you're checking in on yourself, like just as much as you would check in on your coworkers. Make sure you're doing that check-in with yourself.
Perfect. And for family, if you could tell your family one thing about what you did in the profession, for them to understand a little about that,
I would probably tell them thank you. I would tell them thank you, because I'm gonna get emotional during this part, but my family gave up a lot. Our families give up a lot for us to be able to do the job that we did or still do. And as much as we try to get them to understand what we're doing, trying to understand where your family's coming from, because I saw my mom break down multiple times on different calls I handled. My mom got very close with Brandon and them afterwards, so she really struggled when the video footage came out of Brandon's call and to hear everything that went on. I would tell my family thank you so much. I wouldn't necessarily try to get them to understand so much from what I go through, but just letting them know that they were always at the forefront of my mind, because as dispatchers, I always kept telling myself, if I called in or if my family called in, what would I want them to hear? And I just would tell them thank you for giving me the time in the dispatch center, for helping me raise my daughter so I could do that time, because that time was very important to me. And I would tell them thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Whew. This has been an episode. Thank you for everything that you did in 911, that you are still doing for 911, giving back, and especially this project that you have coming up. And just thank you for being an awesome friend, man. We've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's always awesome talking with you, whether it was while you were still in dispatch and I would see you at conferences, or now that we're on the circuit going to, different conferences and stuff, but especially like this, just being able to talk, share some feelings, and this is our way of giving back as well. So thank you for everything.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Yes, this has been awesome. So I'll be back with you here in just one moment.
Okay.
And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you ever want to be a guest on the show, you can email me, and that'll be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on social media. You can become a subscriber of the podcast for extra stuff, bonus episodes, getting episodes a week early, ad-free stuff, so many different things. You can simply go to links.co/WTT podcast. That's links with 2 i's.co/WTT podcast. And you'll find everything there. You'll find email, everywhere where to follow, the latest episode, a link to schedule an episode with me if you are new to dispatch, seasoned, or retired. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I would love to share your story to literally millions, to open the eyes of all those around the world to what it is that 911 professionals do on a daily basis, their experience, and their powerful stories. So reach out to me. I would love to have you on. There's also links on there to pre-order book number 2 of Imagine Listening, and I will be republishing, redesigning my version of book number 1 that'll be coming out in the beginning of December of 2024. And you can also find a link there for podcast and dispatch merchandise. So make sure to check it out. Once again, it's links with 2 i's.co/WTT podcast. This broadcast has been sponsored by In Digital, Leader Next Gen Core Services. And again, shouts out to all the subscribers. And you can see this on Facebook, as well as YouTube, X, and LinkedIn Live. And you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone. and we will see you all in the next one.